Good evening, namaskar. I'm Dr. Arshiya Sethi, and I'm the founder and managing trustee of CRE Foundation, co-producer of this 5-part series on arts and the law, what they do not teach you in art school. So I have with me a presentation that will tell you a little more about this program, and with your permission, I'm going to cut into that now. Yes. Right. So this is a program that has 5 segments to it. We've already had one of them, but this is a 5-session talk, which is co-produced by the Visual Arts Gallery, India Habitat Center, and CRE Foundation. It's an attempt during COVID time to keep the India Habitat Center that hub, which always supported the arts in various ways. Our first session, which has already been done, was on the 13th of October. It was on abuse of power, sexual harassment in the arts. During the COVID period, many issues came to the forefront, which allowed us to see a pattern. The pattern was arts and the law intersecting. And one of the issues that came to the forefront in this segment was sexual harassment in the arts. So we did a session, you've seen the details. I'm sure you can read it from here. But what has emerged from that session is something that I'd wish to report to this body. We are doing a workshop on the prevention of sexual harassment and have formed a group of progressive educators in the arts that call themselves Gurus Against Sexual Harassment. This is the first step in the right direction, so I thought that it should be reported to you. Today, our theme is going to be the NDPS Act and drug use in the arts. We have a very distinguished panel. You can already see Abha Singh, lawyer, social activist, and founder of the NGO Rann, Samar. Our discussant is Dr. Sanjay, Chugh, senior consultant psychiatrist. I think both don't need an introduction because they are very well known. They are very well seen and often seen in the media. Dr. Chugh used to write a regular column answering questions, and he's played a very seminal role in bringing mental health into the, has foregrounded mental health. Abha Singh ji has been seen recently in the very celebrated case that is ongoing in Mumbai with drugs. And when I thought of who would be the person who knows the NDPS inside out, who knows how tricky it is, there's some words that are normally used for the NDPS, but I won't use this on this public platform, but it is a tricky act to say the least. And we welcome both of them to this program. But before I hand over to them, there are a few more things I want to say. I want to prepare you for what's coming. On the 10th of November, we're dealing with a subject that has not been given the importance that it should have been given, which is copyright and plagiarism. We have an absolute authority in the legal field, Amit Datta, from the IP firm called Sai Krishna and Associates, India's authority in copyright and plagiarism. Discussant with him will be somebody we all know very well, Anita Ratnam, performer and arts entrepreneur, the one who set up Nartaki.com, India's largest dance portal. 24th, we have what artists should know about contracts, force majeure, and the acts of God. Our speaker here, legal speaker, will be Sujit Ghosh, advocate of the Supreme Court, and Sanjay Roy, Teamwork Arts, whom we all know is going to be the discussant. This pandemic has brought to the forefront the importance of artists to understand legal paperwork and the need for contracts. That is going to be the thrust of this presentation. And finally, on our last day, in sort of a more philosophical manner, we ask certain questions about art, obscenity, prescriptions, and parampara, and our legal expert will be Akhil Sibal, who's senior advocate, and discussant will be Visual Arts Galleries, the person who set up the Visual Arts Gallery, consultant, arts advisor, and curator, Dr. Alka Pandey. Some of you, after reading these ideas, probably have questions that are striking you. To help us prepare better, to help us in advance mention to our speakers, you may want to send us an email on artsandthelaw@gmail.com. What are our eventual plans with these 5 sessions? Well, the material will be available for access on YouTube, website of India Habitat Center, and inshallah on the website of Cree Foundation. We plan transcribing and translating the material into 10 Indian languages to help in the dissemination. We are doing this work of the translations via partnerships between arts and activist organizations. We will be creating and running workshops. The workshop that I've already told you in the field of sexual harassment is one of them. Plans are afoot, albeit at an initial stage for a book. Now, just as an introduction to this topic we are going to do today, I want to mention that we are in a way in the dark because there has been no study done on the extent, trends, and patterns of drug use in the arts in India. In fact, the first national survey of drug use, which was also called Extent, Trends, and Patterns of Drug Use in India, was started in 2000 and was published in 2004. 15 years later, the second version of it was done. But surprisingly, this sector of the arts has received no attention from the drug community. Within the arts community also, while there is no denying that drug use exists, there has been no self-reflection. It's commonly believed, in fact, that the burden of creativity is ascribed to the high in quotation, of drug use. And we have a lot of artists who have claimed that, who have been closely associated with drug use. And I've mentioned some of them in this slide. The important thing to notice is that these are the people who died young due to drug overdose and cut short their very brilliant lives. You understand the difference between licit and illicit drugs. I hope that Dr. Chugh, who will speak immediately after me, will be able to expand a little bit about this and also tell us what drugs. What are drugs? Because very often people don't understand that itself. I know for a fact, and I'm admitting it, that the first lesson I ever got on drug a workshop I attended, shocked the living daylights out of me because I didn't even realize what all constitutes drugs. Now, many of you know me as a great votary of dance in amongst the arts. And so since dancers use their body to express, one would think, and there has been this belief, that dancers look after their bodies and do not do drugs as such. Yet dancers have spoken about how they use recreational drugs, how they're offered drugs by their patrons and customers. And alcohol is a drug. So even the offering of alcohol is an offering of drug. Dancers have described how to alleviate boredom on quieter nights. It would be tempting to have a little more than expected. Now, this has been feedback that has come in from outside India. But things like this are known to happen in India as well. Close to home, we have dancers, bar dancers. We have dancers associated with musical troupes, dancers who perform in the settings of badlands, interiors of India, even the Londa dancers, basically all subaltern dancers whose life intersects with these issues. So this is not somebody else's problem. This is our problem. Now, the University of Leeds story is that dancers don't do drugs, but in 2017, the Dance magazine did a story on drug use in dance, and many things came to the forefront. In 1986, a world-famous dancer, Chelsea Kirkland, revealed her cocaine addiction. In 1987, the American Ballet Theatre star Patrick Bissell died at the age of 30 from an drug overdose. Even well-known dance companies like the Royal Danish Ballet Dancers were allegedly involved in cocaine abuse. And from the case of Simone Mesmer, who became fortunately the principal dancer of the Miami City Ballet, she admitted that she lost huge amounts of money in rehabilitation and at least 3 years of her already short dance life career. What makes artists extra vulnerable is the question that I would like to begin with. You know, first, we must acknowledge that they are very precious human resources. They're assets of a different kind. Being highly trained and in a very specialized knowledge. Replicating them is a long and hard process. The trigger for them can come from the physicality of their corporeal practice. Dancers dance long hours, 8 hours. It's exhausting. The stress emanating from the need to excel creates anxieties. So sometimes all of these, along with this uncertainty of professional pathways, the long days of travel, they spend long time on the road on tours and grueling schedules, all come together to encourage them to maybe begin with recreational drugs. But often what starts with recreational drug use, puts us into conflict, becomes more menacing, and puts us into conflict with the law. Actually, there is one thing in common to drugs and the arts. Both alter our perception of the world and make us experience worlds and emotions and experiences that are out of the normal. In the case of drugs, the shift is in cognition and perception and even goes on up to hallucination. In the world of the arts, the altered perception is through rasa swadam, the savoring of the sentiment of rasa without actually going through the experience. So you feel the fear of a snake approaching you, but there is no snake approaching you. So without the risk, you are actually going in through the experience. So in effect, one pathway, that of drugs, is a risk-prone pathway, and the other pathway, that of arts, is not a risk-prone pathways. Drug and so if I had to cheer for something, I'd cheer for the arts. With these words, I would like to introduce Dr. Sanjay Chugh and ask him, a senior consultant psychiatrist, and ask him to take forward this conversation, particularly framing the very large issue of drugs. And like COVID, drugs actually is a very democratic thing. You, because of class, caste, color, race, position in society, status, you have no guaranteed coverages. There is nothing to protect you. You are as vulnerable as the next guy. So how do we understand it? Let us try and understand this demon. Let us try and figure out how we can keep ourselves safe and be on top of the situation. So Dr. Sanjay Chugh, may I request you to please take over from here, and I close this PowerPoint.
Oh. Okay, Arshiya. Hi, Arshiya. Hi, Abha. Hi, everyone. Arshiya, you have to promise to tell me when 9.5 minutes are over, because this is such a vast topic. I could go on and on
Sure, I will.
The different aspects of drugs. Okay, let's start with an understanding of what drug abuse is and what drug dependence is, and then I'll tell you what drugs are, drugs of use, drugs of abuse, and so on. You know, if in my hands I could show you a spectrum, or I could draw a line, and we talk about any chemical. When we talk about drugs, we obviously talking about, the usual ones are nicotine, alcohol, cannabis, and then the not so common ones, at least we would like to believe that the others are not so common. But what I'm going to say applies to every conceivable chemical that can be used or abused. So at one end of this spectrum is no use, where a person is not using that particular chemical. This would be a child, a young adolescent. Then as you start growing older, you reach middle adolescence. From no use, you come to a stage of experimentation. From experimentation, you come to social use. Then you can come to abuse, and finally you come to dependence. So broadly, there is no use, there is use, there is abuse, and there is dependence. Now, what is it that makes a drug a drug? There is a part of the brain which is called the reward center. Any chemical that goes and acts on the reward center and stimulates it, leading to the release of certain chemicals, which we call happiness molecules. There are things called dopamine, endorphins, and all. Any chemical which is going to the reward center, stimulating it and causing the release of these chemicals, is a chemical which, if a person has tried it once and he has experienced a good feeling after trying it, the brain starts creating associations or memories immediately. The next time that you're not feeling so good, your brain will remember, that when I took alcohol, or I took cannabis, or I took whatever, I took ecstasy or heroin or something, it made me feel much better than I was feeling at that time. And that memory or that association which is generated in the reward center is what suggests to the user or to the individual that why don't you try this again? This is a hardcore biological basis of what drugs are. Now, you try these chemicals or this particular chemical 3 or 4 or 5 times, you find that using that chemical is releasing these happiness molecules in very, very large amounts. The usual things that a human being does, which stimulate the reward center, which make us feel good. You are feeling hungry, you want to go to a restaurant, have good food, you wear good clothes, you spend time with family, with friends, you exercise, you have sex. These are the stimuli which also trigger off or stimulate the reward center. But the usual amount, if I could quantify it, the usual amount of the happiness molecules that are released would be, let's say, 10 to 20. As opposed to this, when you start smoking, nicotine would stimulate the reward center and probably release 50 units of the happiness molecule each time that you take it. When you start taking alcohol, alcohol would probably release 300 to 400 of these units. You take cannabis, cannabis also releases roughly the same amount of chemical each time that you take it. I'm just giving you rough numbers. It's not quantifiable like this. As opposed to these alcohols and cannabis-like substances, if a person takes something like cocaine or he takes ecstasy, the number of happiness molecules that would be released could be upwards of 5 to 10,000. With heroin, it is also around 10,000. The more the number of happiness molecules that are released, the stronger the relationship that is created inside the brain in the reward center between happiness and the use of that chemical. And so the drugs which release a lesser number of happiness molecules or lesser units of happiness molecules are what we call soft drugs. And the drugs which release the thousands of units of happiness molecules, those are what we call hard drugs. And as the term indicates, the harder the drug, the greater the potential of abusing it, the greater the potential of becoming addicted to it. Now, what is addiction? Addiction is almost like a switch inside the brain. A person starts taking a chemical, it could be anything. It could be, like I said, nicotine, it could be cannabis, it could be alcohol, cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, blah, blah, blah. I could name 50 different such chemicals that are used. It is not that the first time that you take the chemical, you become dependent on it. You start taking the chemical and all of a sudden, it's probably completely unpredictable when in a certain individual or a given individual, this flip will happen. But the switch flips from the off to the on position. And the moment that it goes into the on position, that is when I would say that you're dependent on that particular chemical. Now, what is it that defines dependence? There are certain very, very well laid down criteria which are simple to understand, or I'll try and simplify them to whatever extent possible. The two primary criteria for establishing dependence on any substance, the first is loss of control. Loss of control means that you are regularly taking that substance in larger amounts that you intended to. It's like a person saying, well, I have only 2 drinks today, and he ends up having 6 drinks on a regular basis. Or the person saying, I will have only 2 joints today and regularly smokes far in excess of 2 joints. Or I will drink only till 9 o'clock, I'll have my dinner and I'll go off to sleep. And regularly the person is drinking past midnight. So that also is reflective of a loss of control. And of course, the third loss of control is when you lose control over yourself and your behavior. There are behavioral abnormalities. There is disinhibition. There could be aggressiveness. There could be abusiveness that comes up. All of this I would club under this rubric of loss of control. The second is compulsiveness. The person is compelled to take the substance. I am smoking because I'm feeling tense. I'm smoking because I've gotten up in the morning. I need to go to the washroom. I smoke when I drive. I smoke whenever I have a cup of tea. I smoke when I have a cup of coffee. I smoke when I'm drinking. I smoke before a meal. I smoke after a meal. So this is almost a compulsion. You are compelled to smoke. The same thing applies to alcohol. The same thing applies to any other chemical that I have mentioned. So loss of control and compulsiveness are two very, very important diagnostic criteria to establish dependence on that chemical. Then there are other criteria. For instance, a person is taking a substance regularly. The day that he's not able to take that substance, or he doesn't take that substance of his own volition, he experiences a lot of discomfort, a lot of withdrawal symptoms. So the presence of withdrawal symptoms when you don't take the substance is another feature of dependence. The next feature of dependence is something called tolerance. Tolerance would mean that you're able to take larger and larger quantities of that substance without getting as affected or as intoxicated as you would earlier by lesser amounts. Or there is a need to take greater amounts of that substance to produce the same effect that you are seeking. So we have loss of control, we have compulsiveness, we have the presence of withdrawal symptoms, we have tolerance, and a very important criterion, continuing to take the substance despite knowing that use of that substance is causing personal problems, or it is causing interpersonal, which means relationship problems, or it is causing occupational problems. This is again a very important criteria in the checklist which needs to be ticked. And finally, the presence of some physical problem, knowing that you have that problem, and in spite of that knowledge, you continue to take that substance. It's like an alcoholic or a person who's dependent on alcohol who has a problem in his liver. He has a fatty liver or he has cirrhosis, and he says, I will be able to overcome this. He continues to drink, little realizing that each sip that he's taking is probably poison for him. So this is what dependence is. Why is it happening? It happens because all these chemicals of abuse, what we call drugs of abuse, all of these, they have stimulated the reward center. And when the reward center is continuously and consistently getting stimulated and is getting exposed to those 200, 300, 500 units of happiness, it stops associating happiness with the presence of the 5, 10, or 20 units of chemicals, which are regular day-to-day activities would release. And the day that association is formed, the person's brain is never happy unless it has a consistent and assured exposure to those 300, 500, 1000, 5000 units of the happiness molecules. And I've had patients who would probably kill them. Typically seen with all opium-based drugs, morphine, heroin, and so on, where a patient would kill his own mother just to get 300 rupees or 500 rupees to get enough money to buy the next dose of the medicine.
So Sanjay, I'm going to interrupt now to remind you that you had asked me to tell you when 9 minutes were over, 9.5 minutes. It's over now. Do you have something else to say? Otherwise,
take it up in the discussion.
Yes, actually, you brought us to a very important point of how conflict with the law is inevitable once you go down the route of the drugs. It's not just in the fact that certain drugs are illegal, and if you consume them, you have come into conflict with the drugs. It's also that dependency brings you into repeated conflicts with the drug in the form of threats or violence, your unpredictable loss of control behavior, in the compulsiveness of getting your next fix. All of this leads us into a conflict with the law. And here I would like to welcome and invite Abhaji to take over and introduce to us the term, the whole idea of the NDPS Act, when it was created, why was it created, and what are its difficult elements within the Act. And since you have a PowerPoint, let me try and start that on. Do you want me to start it right away, Abhaji?
Yeah, in fact, I can give them a brief idea and then we could have a casual discussion so that...
Okay, that's much better.
Because
it's less dependence on technology.
We can just run through it, yeah. Because then I can go, otherwise for coordination would be a problem which slide we are on. So I'll just tell them a little about it. And we can supply the presentation to everyone, so whoever's interested can go through it in details later.
Certainly, yes.
So a very good evening to all the members of India Habitat Center, CREE Foundation, and Visual Arts Gallery. I think it's a pleasure to be with you all. And I think because of the Sushant Singh Rajput, Riya Chakravarti case, NDPS Act has suddenly come into limelight. People who were taking it casually because they thought that a little use of drugs for personal use would not land them behind bars. And people read about rave parties, but they didn't know that after rave party they got bail immediately. But if the government agencies decided not to let them have bail, they could be behind bars for months, years, and that is what happened, because we saw in Riya Chakravarti, she got bail after 30 days, while her brother Shavik and others are still behind bars. So let's just run through the PowerPoint. I'll just highlight some of that, Arshiya, and then we would discuss.
Yes. Okay. Give me a second. I have it all here. I open it and yes, patiently, please. Yes, sharing the screen.
Otherwise, okay.
No, that's fine. We set now. You say next and I'll move on. Okay? Yeah.
I mean, next. 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 See, this is all about the history. I mean, it came about, when did it come out? Next, we can go to this. This is just the introduction. I'll come on the main sections and we'll discuss. Arshiya, we can go to the next. See, this to handle drugs, this was then run specifically, and you now have special courts that handle it. Next, I mean, I'll tell you where to halt. You can just skim through. You have special courts, and as we heard that these are the special courts which were handling the trial of the cases. And next, major shortcomings. I will first come to this, because there were a lot of problems, because since you have been hearing the Riya Chakravarti case and people thought why we are not getting bail. The biggest issue was everybody thought, because there are so many Supreme Court guidelines. We'll just halt here a little. That bail is a right. So, but in this case, let me tell you, where NDPS comes, it is non-bailable. And another very important thing, which is very clearly says that when agencies are coming to do a raid, there should be 2 independent panchas. Section 100 is required for all the people who are listening, that they must know their rights. What happens that the law is so vast, and since you don't know what your rights are, at times you face a lot of problems. So there are so many times that agencies have tried to settle scores. As a lawyer, I have seen people who've come and told me that there were drugs that were placed on them, so they would not get bail. So what is important here is that Section 100 of the CRPC says that whenever a government agency is coming on a drug search, there should be 2 independent people as witnesses who will sign. They are called the panchas. So if any cop is trying to put a case on you, you must say that there should be 2 independent people, and their statements are a must, so that it safeguards your interest. So this is very important, which I felt, because I'm a human rights advocate, and I feel I must guard your interests first before ensuring that the act is implemented. Then also, next. So Section 100, please always remember, Arshiya, we'll go to the next. This is, I wanted them to know specifically that Section 100 will always guard their interest. Next.
Landmark judgments.
Next. This is done. Section 50, I did this. And then this is also very important, that this, not landmark. Even if you go by this, again, I said about Section 100, that landmark judgment, as I was talking of Balbir Singh, this said that the panchas have to be there. So nobody can just put you in any case saying that, oh, we recovered this much drugs from you. So if any cop is making an offense, he has to show discovery of drugs on you. So these are what this Punjab, this case, State of Punjab versus Balbir Singh, made it very clear, that you must know your rights. And also, but also one more thing, Section 58 is important because it puts strict punishments on people making vexatious or frivolous complaints. So first, I was trying to tell you that your protection is Article 100 of the thing, and Joginder Singh versus State of Himachal Pradesh. This clearly says that even if police does a raid and says it found charas on you, but there have to be independent panchas so that you are protected. So please just know your rights, because now this act is so vast, it is cognizable, non-bailable. It for your children you need to know, as parents you need to know, as young party goers you need to know that if you're caught in a rave party, you must ensure that you are safe. Next. Next, Arshiya, we'll just skim through it and then I'll come.
Nuraga.
Yeah, next.
Quantum of punishment.
Yeah, actually mine is not showing the, okay, it's anyway, see now I think there's in my screen it is showing the cases. So anyway, now I'll go ahead with it. And if you're on the punishment, the very important thing which I want to talk now in relation to this, that the charge which NCB, the Narcotics Control Bureau, slapped on Riya Chakravarti was 27A, which tried to make her a trafficker and a syndicate, but for commercial, but for individual users, as you said, for arts, like you talked of artists. Let me tell you, a lot of the studies that have been done, maybe by the by US or India, it says that the maximum drugs are used either by people in the entertainment industry or artists. Why is it? Maybe because of the creativity angle, or it gives them the spur to be creative. But we are not going on that. We are trying to say that this act tries to protect people who are small time consumers, and that is why Section 27 of the NDPS Act clearly prescribes for punishment only 6 months to 1 year, which means that you can get a bail immediately. And that is what we have seen, that in rave parties where young students have been caught partying, they have got bail within 24 hours. But in Ria's case, if you see, NCB had put 27A of the NDPS Act, because they said that she was trying to procure drugs for Sushant Singh Rajput, and from her credit card 10,000 was paid for the drug, which again I feel was a section which should not have been put on her, but maybe because of the media trial, because of the sensitivity of the case, 27A was put. But when she got bail, the High Court did come heavily on NCB and said, you cannot call her a drug syndicate, you cannot call her a cartel, because she was not trafficking drugs. She may have got small quantity, and that too for Sushant Singh Rajput. So it is very necessary that now I would say, forget Riya, even for any other person on whom 27A has been slapped, but who is only a small time consumer, or you are not in possession of commercial quantity, which in the slide is there. I have laid out what are the commercial quantities and what are the Arshiya, if you can show what is the commercial quantity and what is for personal use, that would make it very clear. So the courts very clearly said that if it is for personal use, if you are not a commercial user, then you should be given bail. And yeah, this is what it is: amphetamine, cocaine. For every ganja also, small quantity is 1 kg, commercial quantity is 20 kgs. You must know these things, because these are the usual quantities which cocaine, small quantity is 2 grams and commercial quantity is 100 grams. So if you have less than 2 grams, you can always be covered by Section 27 of the NDPS Act, where bail is easy. But yet, let me tell you, the courts are very clear that any charge under NDPS is non-bailable. And in fact, Justice Sarang Kotwal, when he was hearing Riya Chakravarti's bail, he clearly said, and I want to read this out for you, if the accused claims bail as a matter of right in case of possession of small quantity, then he says no investigation can be carried out to find the source and trade of the contraband. So even if you are a small user of drugs, it is necessary for the authorities to investigate. Only then they can reach the bigger cartels. And that is why in this case, people like Shavik, Dipesh Sawant and all were arrested and they were behind bars. So in fact, the judge clearly said that immediate bail will defeat the object of the act. And that is why this is a case, this is an act which is non-bailable. You have to apply for bail, and bail is not a right. So I would like to tell all the young users, the college students who have been taking this casually and they've been thinking that they can get bail as a matter of right under the NDPS, you are not going to get bail as a matter of right. So I would like to tell the parents also, please keep a check Just have an eye on your child, what he's doing, where he's doing, because a lot of drugs are being used due to peer pressure, because even children who don't want to use, but because of the tremendous pressure in colleges. And it is not only in the Bollywood or in the arts, in the field of music or in the field of culture, it is equally rampant in educational institutions. Outside schools you can find drugs. And I think it is time, rather than we penalizing the small time users, we go heavy on the cartels, we go heavy on the syndicates, we try to find out how is so much drugs coming into India. And that is why I think media has also been running after this case. But Supreme Court, in the very clear case of State of Punjab versus Balbir Singh, which I have put it on the slide, has clearly said that these offences are non-bailable. But one thing is very clear in this, that there is a provision. This Act also talks of reformation, it talks of rehabilitation. And NDPS Act clearly says, and I think that is where the angle for arts also comes, because there may be a lot of people who, because of their creativity or because of their culture, have gone into drugs, have gone into small time usage of drugs. For them, the Act says that if you come out clean, that yes, you've taken drugs, but you want to rehabilitate, you want to go clean, and you want to be admitted to a hospital, you will be immediately granted bail. And this is which is important, because the Act clearly is harsh on traffickers, it is strict and stringent, but it also it shows compassion and leniency in laying down reformative approach under the section 64A and 71. So this reformative approach should be kept in mind. And I think that for the arts world is also very important, that you may have gone into it, because as I said, studies do say that the entertainment industry, the art field, does have an ample usage of drugs. But if at any time you feel, as the previous speaker was saying, that you are becoming addictive or it is going out of hand, please do go to de-addiction camps, and the Act looks at you very compassionately, and you will get bail immediately. But the minimum time to stay in the hospital, it says, is 3 weeks, where de-addiction would be done, as in the case of Fardeen Khan, who pleaded guilty and said that he wanted to go to de-addiction and was granted bail immediately. So these are two important facts. But when I come to Riya Chakravarti and Sushant Singh Rajput's case, in fact, the depression that he was suffering from, it clearly said, yes, like under what sections was Riya Chakravarti booked and the penalties. Riya was booked under section 21, 22. The worrisome section in this was 27A, because 27A is usually not put on people who are using small quantities or are one-time, two-time users, but 27A is a very harsh section, which I would say as a lawyer was wrongly applied in this case, because neither was she a cartel, neither was she a syndicate, but this clearly shows that the discretion which government agencies have, that shows that they can really use the law as they want. And these sections you can read, because section 21 also talks of that these drugs can be used for medicinal purposes. And in fact, in northern India, in the Himalayas, in the states of Himachal Pradesh and others, a lot of cannabis is grown, and that is known as hemp. And in fact, you must have heard of CBD oil, which was supplied to Sushant Singh Rajput. I would like to tell you, CBD oil, if you Google, you can order online. And after a certain composition, the THC, if it is less than 0.3, it is legitimate. You can purchase, you can use it for depression and other purposes. But if its quantity of a chemical THC is more than 0.3, then it becomes illegal. But I think the NCB needs to look into it, because CBD oil is openly available and you can order online. So that is one thing. And as I said, for small time consumption, the punishment is less, 6 months and a fine of 10,000. But in harsher sections where you are a syndicate or a cartel, the punishment can go up to 20 years. Next, Arshiya, I think we've covered this. We can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then
section 21, 22. Yeah. This is for the commercial section.
27A.
27A I've talked, yeah, 27A I've told you, and 27A is something which is basically for cartels, which should not have been applied here. And because in 27A, it is punishment from 10 to 20 years. So then non-granting of bail. I mean, because you put section 27A, NCB from day one thought that it would deny bail, because if you see this case, you talked of money laundering, nothing came out of the money laundering. CBI also could not, at least till now, it has not established that Sushant Singh Rajput was murdered. From day one, I was very adamant in the sense, because the facts were there. There was no mens rea, there were no evidences, and we said that Sushant committed suicide, and maximum the case could be of abetment to suicide. But to prove abetment to suicide on Ria is also very difficult, because neither was she when the death took place, and she had left on 8th June. So now if you see, possessing drugs, even a small quantity, can put you behind bars, because in this case the Bombay High Court has made it very clear that bail is not a right. And even if it is a small quantity, if the agencies feel that they want to they want to investigate the bigger cartels, then they can arrest you and they can deny you bail. So these are certain things which everybody needs to know. And somewhere the drugs are very rampant. We need to have an awareness. We need to know, as the earlier speaker said, that it is addiction, and if you go back again and again to it, so it is necessary that awareness is really looked into it. Mental health is a very important issue, and also peer pressure. Maximum youth are getting into drugs because of peer pressure, and NDPS Act has not been used the manner in it should be, because at least in Mumbai, I've seen only in this case has NCB become overactive. Otherwise, the mandate for NCB, the Narcotics Control Bureau, is for international drug movement, interstate drug movement, and small cases are supposed to be done by the local police. But my experience is a lot of corruption goes into it, and since a lot of money exchanges hands, drugs are being sold at every nook and corner, and people somehow get away. But now with media focusing on it, people becoming aware, we need to really check this. And if we can control the sale of drugs, that is the only way we can check the oversupply of drugs. And definitely it is self-defeating. It is very difficult to get out of it. So it is better that if the supply is checked, we can handle it much better. But the NDPS Act is a very strong act. It also says that any statement, any witness, any statement given in front of an officer, you cannot take advantage of the Evidence Act. You cannot withdraw once you have deposed in front of the officers of the NCB. So please remember that when you are giving a statement, whatever you are going to speak in front of them, it will hold good in the trial, in the court, because it is a special act. And even in this case, Shovik and others who tried to withdraw their statements, the court would not listen to it, because this has special powers. They are not considered police officers, and hence the Evidence Act is not applicable. It is the NDPS. And it also says if there is a friction between CRPC and the NDPS Act, it will be the NDPS Act which will have the upper hand. So please be careful. Just remember that say no to drugs, not only for your health, but for mental health and for the society. And I'm open to questions. If there's anything else you want to know, Arshiya, I would wait for that.
Certainly. I am just going to stop the share. I don't think there was anything after this. So I'm going to stop the share in a moment and request Sanjay to join me in taking forward the points that Abha made. Sanjay, would you like to go in first?
No, you start. I'll
Okay.
take the cue from what you're saying.
So I just wanted to mention that in case any of our participants would like to send us the questions, you have to use the chat box to do that. Meanwhile, on my own, I have a few points that I'm concerned with. Abha, actually, the three of us are a very peculiar Trimurti. You are the law person, Sanjay is the medical person, and I have been the one who has worked in the field. I worked with the UNODC on drug prevention. It was what we call the sunshine sector of the drug issue, as a social issue, because I was working with the people Sanjay referred to as non-users, as the young people. And the idea was to keep them as non-users. And at that time, we felt that some of the things that were coming out was that every year the peer pressure was becoming so severe that people were being driven not just to drug use, but also to experiment in dangerous drug use. Like, one of the things not mentioned at all is the fact that there are traditional drugs that are sanctioned. So although they may be socially sanctioned, they may be illicit, but you can still find them. Ganja is one of them. We know that bhang at holy time is consumed by so many people. In rural areas, they consume hemp, and the CBD oil is consumed by a lot of people. Today, I met some friends who have, as the aging process is coming on, are using CBD oil. Now, the thing is, of course, you've mentioned that 0.3 percent wala point in the CBD oil, but isn't there a sort of looseness in the way things are described? So you have certain things that are actually illegal, illicit, but easily available and used. Even medicinal drug use. In many parts of India, today, the biggest worry is medicinal drug use. Codeine, you've mentioned it in your thing. It is available without doctors' prescriptions. So should not the NDPS walas and the NCB walas be looking inwards and finding the gaps and porosity in their own functioning and their own network?
So I want to say 2 or 3 things here. I think this thing about peer pressure being a major determinant of drug dependence, I think it's a completely wrong and overhyped concept. Saying that peer pressure can cause a person to become an addict is like saying peer pressure can cause a person to develop diabetes or hypertension. The day
peer pressure causes a person to experiment.
Exactly. Experimentation is not the same as abusing or getting dependent on the drug.
Okay.
I mean, experimentation, now we accept it as a part of adolescence. Experimentation with smoking, with alcohol, with drugs, with sex. I mean, it's a part of adolescence. That experimentation will lead to problems only in those people who are predisposed to getting that problem.
But there is no way of finding out who is predisposed. So in a moment, for some, there is. There isn't.
There is. You see, you must understand that psychiatric illnesses are also illnesses. It is not that just because you can't see something which you call the mind, it does not mean that these are, mythical illnesses. They are as real, as physical as any conceivable illness affecting any organ of the body. Just because, you have a blood pressure measuring machine and you can make a few pumps and you can figure out, this guy has, his BP is 190 by 120. It does not mean that because you cannot do it for drug abuse and drug addiction, that is not a physical illness. There are well-defined spectra of disorders. So if there is, let's say, a family history of depression, a family history of anxiety disorders, if there is a history of attention, something called ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, if there is a history of conduct disorder, these are the people who are predisposed to becoming addicted to drugs. Unfortunately, psychiatry in this country of ours is a dustbin diagnosis, which is actually why I was very glad when you first approached me with this topic, because it just gives me one more forum on which one can, try and dispel these myths and stigma and misconceptions that abound. Okay. I mean, no one today...
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to ask you this predisposition aspect that you're talking, where you use the word anxiety. So in my introduction, I talked about how the life of an artist is often a life with anxiety for a very long time, because there is no clear pathway. The process of becoming an artist, of the necessary training, is so hard, and you're not sure whether you will become a hit or not. If you just take the example of actors, for instance, who move from stage because they're very good actors and go on to cinema, and then nobody gives them a role. We have so many examples of today's leading stars having spent so many years in sort of unrecognized and in a tough life. So would that sort of a situation lead you towards drugs, or do you have to be by nature predisposed to this
There are
depression or anything like that?
there
Yeah.
are two things that I will say here. If a person has a higher than baseline normal level of anxiety, he's forever looking for ways or at ways of decreasing the anxiety. That's logical. If I'm feeling anxious, I want to feel non-anxious. And I know that the one thing which will definitely make me feel non-anxious / relaxed is a chemical, which is why people who have an underlying anxiety linked problem are predisposed to experimenting more and graduating from that experimentation to the, moving further to the right, as I had explained. The second thing is that what you said about artists and people in this field having high levels of anxiety is absolutely true. I want people to name one profession where people say, oh, we are very relaxed and chilled and we don't have anxiety. I mean, if farmers did not have anxiety, why would 70% of people in Punjab be addicted to? I mean, those are the figures that Abha was quoting. So every profession, I mean, it could be doctors, it could be engineers, IT professionals, artists, models. I mean, you name the profession and you have anxiety. So anxiety is a common determinant, common factor across the board in today's day and age.
By going by what you are saying, I would think then that possibly the small drug use problem is far bigger than we acknowledge. And from what Abhaji has said, the small drug use problem is looked upon with the sort of a benevolent eye by the NDPS and the authorities in India, giving you compassionate rehab oriented bail. Although from what I understand, 80% of the cases relapse 80% of the time. So you are ever likely to be pushed deeper into the morass of drugs. I have another a thought that is striking me. Sanjay, you mentioned sex as one of the pleasure things. Can one assume that that predatory behavior, and I'm linking it with our previous talk here, which was on sexual harassment, is sex also in a way a drug? I mean, maybe I haven't put it correctly, but you understand that it's not a substance in a way that you're consuming, but it is a behavior that indulges in pleasure.
Of course, you see, like I told you, 10 minutes is unfair to give to a psychiatrist to talk about addiction.
Maafi mang rahi hu. We'll do a session separately someday.
So we talk in terms of behavior addictions. We talk in terms of process addictions. So there are people who are addicted to sex. It is definitely an addictive behavior. There are people who are addicted to stealing. There are people who are addicted to antisocial behavior. I mean, the list is endless. Those criteria that I mentioned, once they are met by any behavior, it is what I would call addictive behavior. People who are hooked to their phones, who are hooked to their iPads, who are hooked to gaming, to their PS4s, to watching TV, to blah, 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 all of that is addiction. Those are all behavioral addictions.
Yeah, I would like to add a small thing here, Arshiya. Yeah,
I'm looking at the
what it is seen.
also.
Yeah, this is something very important, that a lot of, like we are talking about sexual assault, a lot of rapes have been committed by people who have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So one needs to look into that a lot of crime against women is a direct resultant of alcohol, be it domestic violence or gruesome rapes. People are under heavy influence of drugs and alcohol when they've just picked up those young girls, 5-year-old child or anything like that. These small kids are raped because under the influence of alcohol and drugs. So we need to, for women's safety also, this is required to be looked into.
So in the 2004 National Survey of Drugs, now sounding so dated, but with which I was in a way associated, because I joined the UNODC after this survey comes out, and my work was to carry on some of the learnings in it. The bigger worry with the drugs, it was linked immediately with a law issues, and that's how my interest in the NDPS Act in the first place came up. I did not study all these, I studied it differently because I was in the social sector. But the other issue was its association with HIV threat, because people under the influence of alcohol or drugs not only behave more brutally, but there is an urgency of a here and now sex, which may
Yes.
often be unsafe in the sexual encounter. So I guess funding at that time was coming via the HIV route, so the HIV angle was a thing. But in the gruesome rape cases that have been reported in the last few years, one common pattern has been deprivation, and the other has been uh, tendencies for drug use. So that is why, while I appreciate the point Sanjay is making about how predispositions lead you more likely to experiment with drugs and stay with drugs, with you, the point I still keep making is the looseness of the act. जब मन करे तो उसका कोई भी सेक्शन आप एम्प्लॉय कर दो, आउट ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट कोई स्टेटमेंट लेके आप किसी को पेडलर बना दो. It covers many aspects, and we as normal people don't understand that when we say my credit card was used, means are bhaiya phas gaye in the whole process as a key participant. We give these things
Exactly.
udhar. We give our houses to our children for parties. We don't know which friend is bringing in what into that thing, but being the owner
Exactly.
of the
Exactly.
house where drugs are being used put me at risk.
You are responsible.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You will be held responsible if it is found in your house. And yes, in fact, this should be a wake-up call for all the parents. Please see that if you are giving your bungalows for parties where the drugs are coming, because the sections are very harsh, bail can be denied. It's not a matter of right. And a lot of crime. In fact, the police needs to work on this heavily, because I feel a lot of rape cases are being committed under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And mental health is something which India is not talking about. Mental health needs to be talked about. We need to be open about it. We need to work on it, because depression is something which is equally, I would say, it is spreading in such a large scale, and we even don't know that who is depressed and who is not.
So Sanjay, just this is a very important point about depression, and we're discussing depression in a forum which is actually about drugs. Would you like to explain to us a little bit about how it is closely associated? Are there any preventions that we can take? Are there any precautions we can take to keep ourselves mentally healthier?
Okay, I want to ask Abha one question, then I'll address this.
Okay, sure.
Abha, why is it that this NDPS Act does not include alcohol? Is it because of the huge amount of money that the alcohol lobby pumps into the pockets that need to be lined? Because for me, alcohol does exactly the same thing to the
Exactly. I
chemical.
mean, exactly, excise, the amount of thousands of crores excise revenue which comes from alcohol, for that matter cigarette also. In fact, after this case which happened, a lot of youth who called me up, or I was addressing some webinars, they said we are going to smoke because it is safer than drugs, because we are being arrested and the charges are harsher. So of course, alcohol, NDPS Act does not talk of alcohol, so maybe that is the reason. And to some extent could be the revenues, you could say. But then as a lawyer, we are supposed to execute the law which is formed by the parliament. So this could be definitely an issue to debate, that why alcohol is not covered. But yes, drugs have a separate section, I mean a different act which is very harsh, that is the NDPS Act.
So Sanjay, you want a second question on this issue?
No, there is an obvious lacuna there. I mean, you legalize cannabis today, you will have an equal amount of money flowing into the exchequer. You want to make
In fact, In fact, for medicinal purposes, the Act allows, and you can grow cannabis in certain areas, because if you have the license and you are supplying to the industry where it is required, you can grow it.
See,
The opium fields.
we must recognize one thing: all the drugs that are abused today were originally introduced into this world as medicines. Cannabis was introduced as a painkiller. Now we recognize so many medicinal uses. Cocaine was introduced as a local anesthetic. Drugs like ecstasy and all were initially used as painkillers and as treatment for attention deficit disorders. Heroin, morphine, fentanyl, codeine, they are the strongest painkillers known to mankind. So, these things.
Even for cancer, so many cancer patients use.
Yeah, morphine.
Painkillers for cancer patients, they are using morphine.
Painkiller, even for big surgeries, you use morphine. It's not only restricted to cancer patients. This is an elephant in the room which no one wants to talk about. Unfortunately, the elephant never walks away on its own. It has to be escorted out. You don't escort it out, you continue to pay the price. And drugs are, guess which is the biggest industry in the world today with the highest profit margins? Drugs.
Drugs, of course. It's so expensive that 0.1 or 2 grams. In fact, when I was looking into this case, they paid bud. That was bud which was procured for Sushant Singh Rajput. 5 grams bud. That is, for that only Riya paid 10,000 rupees from her card. So you can imagine how expensive it is. A 5-gram bud for 10,000.
Okay, we are now coming to the last 10 minutes of the program. And although I did not want it to become come to the questions of the celebrated case you are handling, Abhaji, there have been some questions. So either we take a position that we are not going to address those questions, or we take a position that, all right, if it helps understand the issues better that we are discussing, we can take those questions.
The purpose discussing this case was, like as I said, when I was handling the Salman Khan hit and run case, people got to know how serious the offense is, culpable homicide not amounting to murder if you are drunk, because you thought ek peg pee ke gaadi chala rahe hain, koi gunah nahi hai. But if somebody is hurt, that means you are committing murder, culpable homicide. So I feel this case also would bring awareness among the youth, among the parents, that even a small use of drugs can take you behind jail, and bail is difficult. So that is the reason, these two cases I talk of. And it is the feedback from Mumbai police says that after the Salman Khan drunken driving case, cases of drunken driving have gone down, not only in Maharashtra, Mumbai, but pan-India. So it does help to discuss these cases.
But in this particular case, I think that the positions are very polarized. It's personality driven.
Yeah, but we are not discussing whether he... Yeah, exactly. Now, if we are not debating that it was murder or suicide, but we are debating that whether a small quantity used will be commercial trafficking, whether you can be treated as a cartel or a syndicate, or you should get the benefit of as a consumer, as an individual consumer. So this is what is important.
May I ask you a question that links to what Sanjay very pointedly asked about the fact that alcohol is not an NDPS, and yet alcohol and tobacco, referring to the reference you made about young people wanting to smoke rather than have drugs because it's safer, they are known as the drugs, the gateway drugs, drugs of first use. Once you enter through them, and this risk-taking becomes a thrilling experience, you experiment a little more, and then you go into a troublesome situation. So really, at the end of this, I feel that the government needs to look at its policies far better. And as for us, ordinary individuals and specially gifted individuals of the arts, Sanjay, I still wait for your tips on how we can ensure our mental health.
The most effective way of building resilience inside the human brain. Resilience is what keeps us going. When we are under stress, if my hand is in a state of equilibrium right now, anything that disturbs this state of equilibrium is what we call a stressor. And this distortion in the state of equilibrium is the stress that the individual is exhibiting. Now, something happens to me, the equilibrium is disturbed, so I'm stressed, but there are circuits inside my brain which restore the equilibrium. So even in English, you have a word called resilience, which means the ability to bounce back. The same thing happens here. The artist is under stress, resilience kicks in, you come back to normal, next event happens, resilience kicks in, third event happens, resilience kicks in. But what if the magnitude of one event is so much that it overwhelms the resilience? Or what if a series of smaller events happen which overwhelm the resilience? Now, this will happen in two conditions, or maybe I'll say three conditions. One is the intensity of the event, or the cumulative effect of a series of events. That effect will overwhelm the resilience. The second is where the person is biologically or genetically predetermined or predisposed to having poor resilience. In which case, even smaller events will trigger off bigger problems. And the third is that it's a combination of both. The healthiest way of strengthening the circuits which control our resilience is to change our lifestyle. Unfortunately, that is the key for every kind of preventive strategy in this world. Sleeping on time, waking up on time, balanced diet, exercising regularly, limiting the amount of chemicals that you take. I mean, you do this, you protect your heart, you protect your brain, you protect your skin, you protect your blood system, your kidneys, everything. But what this highlights is that all the organs inside the body are actually interconnected organs. And what affects one affects all the others also. So if one has a detrimental effect on the other organs, then the strategy which has a positive impact on one organ will also have a positive effect on all other organs. And this positive impact that we are seeking is the building up of resilience.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point. We can't win all battles. We can't be the best at every time. And that prayer that says, give me the courage to accept that which I can change and to accept that which I cannot change also. So that reality check is very, very important. And I think happiness becomes an attitude. I'm saying happiness, but what I mean is resilience becomes an adat. Just as smoking can become an adat.
And also, sorry for butting in, I feel is faith. Having faith in yourself. You know, like my guiding mantra is, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? So then anxiety would not be there if you have faith and hope. That is something which will get you out of all depression.
Well, thank you very much for this absolutely wonderful conversation. Strangely, it has ended on a very philosophical note, almost a spiritual note, which may just be the truth of the issue, that it's not spirits we are talking about, but it's a spiritual note we are talking about. Thank you so much, Abhaji. Thank you particularly for that wonderful PowerPoint, which I will circulate to all the people who registered to sign in and those who will continue to be in touch with us over the coming days for, recordings of this session. I will add your PowerPoint separately with it as well. Sanjay, thank you so much. As always, you have proved to be so brilliant and to the point and always hopeful. I'm very, very grateful to you. And you know that, many years ago when I used to do programming for India Habitat Center, then itself, since then I have been bothering Sanjay, who's still paying a price for being my friend in college.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Very, very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Deeply grateful to all of you.
Thank you.